you need to know that God loves you. Get ready. Today's show is going to bring you hope. Well, hello and welcome to the Strong Tower Mental Health Podcast. I am your host, Heidi Mortenson, licensed marriage and family therapist. And I'm so excited to have with me Pamela Garfield-Jaeger. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she has written on a controversial topic that I've actually not talked up in this podcast yet. So really praying for God's wisdom in this podcast. For those of you listening, if this is really new to you, that you're able to kind of have an open heart, open ear. This is her book. It's called The Practical Response to Gender Distress. And thank you, Pamela, for being on the podcast.
Thank you. This is great. Thanks.
Yeah, and you really got thrown into this topic. It's not something that you really asked for. And I just want to kind of give a caveat. You come from Jewish faith and grew up in Jersey, correct? Pretty Democrat family. And really, there's been a lot of adjustments, a lot of changes in your life. So can you kind of share how you even got to be in this place that you're speaking out on this topic?
Yeah, I really had a shift, and my family is still quite liberal democratic, and I'm kind of a black sheep at this point in my family. They say they love me anyway. It's kind of,
Yay.
they still love me, but they don't listen to what I have to say.
Mhm.
So I had this big awakening in 2020 when, there was the lockdowns and there was the BLM riots and there were the black squares, and I'd actually been on disability for a few years before that, so I wasn't really that quite aware of how much the country had become divided, and what they call Trump derangement syndrome had been happening. I was pretty neutral on the topic, not a Trump supporter, but I didn't hate him either. I was neutral towards him,
Okay.
and
Yep.
yeah, and I was not. I would never have considered myself on the right or right leaning at that point, but I was just watching the riots happen, the mostly peaceful riots,
Mhm.
and all of the support from all the corporations, all of my friends, everybody in lockstep going on with this. And I just didn't understand. I felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. So
Mhm.
that was my red pill, as they say. And the cards fell. I had been on disability. I went back to work in 2021. So I was out of work during 2020,
Yeah.
and I was out of work since 2017. When I came back, this is when I really was exposed to this gender issue. And that's where I saw teenagers that were identifying as trans
Mhm.
together in groups. About half the girls at this mental health program were identifying as trans. And I thought it
Mhm.
was very strange that my colleagues didn't see anything strange about that at all. And not only they were encouraging it, they didn't recognize the very obvious mental health issues that were contributing to their trans identities and how they were using the trans identities to avoid getting the right help, things like that. So yeah, I just saw all these things. It really, the cards fell for me in 2020, and they just kept falling over and over again. And that's how I landed here.
So what was it about you though that you saw that it wasn't okay? Like, because you're surrounded by people who think like you, and that was kind of what you did, and you thought like that as well. So what was it about you where you were kind of questioning it? Because they weren't questioning it.
Well, I wasn't around in mental health. That I think that's why it
Got
was
it.
easier for
Because you
me.
had a break. You
I
had
had
this
that
break.
break.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, the first chapter in my book is that whole Rip Van Winkle story. I was kind of like Rip Van Winkle, who was asleep under a rock during this big shift. And then I came back and everyone was so different. I was like, what the heck? This is
Yeah.
so different.
And did
That's
you question it at all? Like, did you say to some of your colleagues, like, isn't there some isn't there some anxiety, or there's some PTSD, there's some eating disorders? Like, did you like bring up some of the preconditioned mental health issues?
I did. It was difficult because when I had been on disability for so many years, so I felt like I was just trying to get my feet wet. I was only part-time. I was per diem, so I wasn't a full-time staffer. Because I couldn't work full-time, I still can't because I have a physical disability. That's also why I'm able to be so outspoken. I have much less to lose here. And I just was waiting for that moment to really start talking to them about it. And then when I felt more comfortable, I actually had just gotten a really good review at that job. That's when
Mm,
the mandates for the COVID vaccine came through, and I was not for that. So I had to leave. So they basically weeded me out before I could really have those conversations.
got it. And you weren't able to stay there because they made the COVID vaccination in this, you were in California.
I was in California. I was a healthcare worker. So I wasn't,
Yeah,
I would have had to get boosters too. And I had already recovered from the virus. I was fine and wasn't going to do it.
right. And so you basically lost your job because you weren't going to take the COVID vaccination.
Yep. And it
Boosters.
was already a
Okay,
struggle to work because it was hard for me to type and I was struggling, but I wanted to be there. But I
right.
had disability anyways. So that's when I said, you know what, I'm out and I'm going to
Got
just speak
it.
the truth instead.
Got it. And so you started making some funny videos.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the other side of you that I would say that got me to pay attention to you was the videos. So I'll actually put in those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'll actually put in one of these videos so you can see Pamela in action with what she does.
Welcome to my office. How can I help you today? I hear your parents say you're having a little trouble at school. Yeah, whatever. I identify as a bee, and my new pronouns are bee buzz. Please use them accordingly. No problem. I would never be trans bee phobic like your parents. In fact, here's some honey for you. You're the best therapist I ever had. Buzz, 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 buzz.
Side to you and how kind of what made you do that and maybe explain, one or two of them.
I think when you feel like you're surrounded by madness, you need to cope with humor. I think that's what I was doing.
Mm,
Somebody in another interview said that I had a theater side to me, and he was right. I do. My mom actually is in theater. That's also probably why she's very liberal and leans left. But also,
yeah.
I get that side of her, which is a strength, which is
Yeah,
to be
it
creative.
is. Yeah,
So,
it's good. Yeah, so what kind of videos did you do? Like give us explain kind of
yeah.
what are some of these videos?
So yeah, in the beginning, I don't know if you've seen all of them. In the beginning, I was starting to do like examples of affirming therapy, and I have all these funny costumes in my closet. So I started putting on these costumes, and then I do that, the type where you talk to yourself, with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
cuts. And I had myself as a therapist and myself as a goldfish, and I told the therapist that they need to affirm my identity and call me Goldie. And then I had the therapist give me a bowl of water and say, "Okay, Goldie, here's your bowl." Stuff like that.
Oh my gosh, that is hilarious. But so we're laughing about it, but this is real. This is actually happening. So and part of what I wanted to have you on is so that those who are listening that have not been exposed to this can gain more confidence in this conversation. Because I think there's a lot of people that are afraid to talk about it because they're going to be called a trans homophobe or a bigot, and there's a lot of hate coming at people if you don't just jump in and 100% support it. So can you kind of explain like help us for some us newbies or those who have not been exposed to this, like help us to be comfortable with this language and to be confident to not be afraid to talk about this.
Well, I think in a way at this point, being called a transphobe makes you part of the cool club. So I hope
Mm,
more people join the cool club.
mm,
Uh, they're doing that to shut down the conversation. They're doing that to intimidate you. All you're doing is speaking truth. You're not hateful. In fact, a lot of the reasons I speak out is because I care about the trans people too. This isn't even about just the D-trans or people,
yeah,
I actually care about the trans people because they're being harmed. They're silently suffering.
yeah,
I'm just watching all the people suffer. They're people that I've worked with for years. That the type of people I've worked with for years that have an unstable sense of self or are struggling in different ways, and I feel like they're being preyed upon. So I'm not hateful, and if they call me hateful, I know in my heart I'm not hateful, and that's all that matters. So I
Mhm.
hope that's the same for others who believe the same thing, you know, that
Right.
names aren't going to stop you.
Yeah. So talk about like what is happening. What is this trans agenda? Like, what is actually happening in the world right now?
Well, in a nutshell, they're trying to turn our entire world upside down.
Mhm.
But what I see the biggest thing is they're dividing families. That's one of the biggest things that I find really sad and difficult to watch. They're they're preying on vulnerable people, people who don't fit in, people who are autistic, people who have trauma,
Yeah.
people who feel lost, foster kids. These are the populations that are falling into this because they're told that they have a new family, they have a glitter family if they are trans, and they are, it does feel really good. They get love
Mhm.
bombed, as they say.
Mhm.
So, and usually does feel good to them for quite a while. It takes several years to recognize that maybe they've made a mistake, or maybe they're having health issues, or that their glitter family isn't really their family and they're not their real true friends, that it's pretty superficial. So I feel like they're recruiting people into these quote unquote communities and then leaving them high and dry because it's superficial. And so I'm seeing them empty people be left even emptier and then with health issues. So that's
And
really
when you
why I think,
say, oh yeah, sorry, keep going.
go ahead. That's why I think that it's important to speak on this. That's all.
Yeah, because you have seen and worked with a lot of detransitioners, and even in your book, you actually have some of them that quote. And we'll get to that. Actually, I want to get to a couple stories of detransition people who have actually detransitioned. But I just want to quote something that is in your book. In your introduction, you say, um, they were so concerned about being politically correct. This is about doctors, therapists. They were so concerned about being politically correct that they stopped doing the most basic tasks that as professionals they were supposed to do: provide therapy, insight, and address the obvious underlying issues. So this is really one of the biggest problems is that, like you said, they're preying on the vulnerable, that we have kids who are struggling with eating disorders, with anxiety, with PTSD, even like divorce in the family, like conflict in the family. And so then they go to a therapist, and what's happening is that therapists are actually suggesting to them, maybe you're trans, maybe, like, because they'll say, like, I don't even like being in my body. Because of course, I mean, most, female girls who go through puberty are like, what's happening in my body? Like, nobody really likes going through puberty. And so then the suggestion from the therapist is, maybe you're trans. And you kind of pull out this in your book where you're like, we're trained to look at the mental health issues, and what's happening right now with a lot of the transgender agenda is that they're saying that all these kids are trans instead of having them focus on the mental health issues. What you also call out is that if you are a therapist and you have them focus on the mental health issues, you are now practicing what's called conversion therapy. And conversion therapy is when a gay person comes to a therapist and the therapist tries to convert them to be straight. And that's not what's happening. Like the therapists that are trying to do what's right are focusing on the mental health issues or the root of the issue or whatever it is that's going on. But that's not happening now. Like these therapists are, and I'm a therapist, so this is, even for me, we need to affirm clients who come in, and if we don't, we actually could lose our license. Like this is a very like this is a, so I'm having you on talking about something that even as a therapist we need to say, whatever the client wants they get.
Yeah, that's never been in our therapy before, that we just go along with everything a client says, right? I mean, especially if someone's doing behaviors that are dangerous or harmful to their life, we explore under. It's funny because I always thought therapists to a fault were too exploratory. We're a little too analytical,
Yes, like,
right? Remember that
oh,
joke,
tell
a
me more
cigar?
about that.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
can you just whatever, I'm just hungry or something, like stop analyzing this. And now
Right.
it's the opposite.
Yeah, like
So
we're right, but this really is, so if somebody comes in and they say, I'm struggling, I don't like my body, my parents are getting divorced, whatever, that therapists these days are saying, well, maybe you're trans. isn't that unethical? Like, I think about if a client comes in and they're like, oh, I'm just struggling with my identity. And if I, as a Christian therapist, tell them about Jesus and like push Jesus on them, that's also unethical. So talk about how this is even ethical to even be suggesting this.
Yeah, well, what that comparison you're making, that trans people would never see it as the same thing because they see this as a civil rights issue somehow. And what you're saying, and I agree with, is that this is more religion. It's a religious belief. It's certainly a belief system, and they don't recognize that. So you're pushing a belief system onto a patient when you suggest that they may or may not be trans. And a person who believes in gender ideology wouldn't look at it that way. They would think of it as sort of a inherent, innate quality that they're born in the wrong body. But just that statement, I mean, where's the proof of that? That's a very, very religious belief, to believe that our bodies are not, that we have these souls inside of our bodies that don't match what we are. It really isn't very logical, but you can't really
Yeah,
speak logic here.
right. So there's a lot. So one of the things that I really have questioned, that I have struggled with, is how doctors are allowing like kids under 18 to get testosterone, get puberty blockers, to get this top surgery and bottom surgery under 18. That part I am really like, I'm questioning that. Like, how is that legal in the United States? I know in the UK and some other countries they're actually banning it. So it is because they're getting research to say this actually isn't helping. They're more suicidal. It's causing more problems for them. Like, the mental health issues aren't leaving once they do the surgery. But in the United States, we're still doing this for children. How
Yeah,
is this
it's
happening?
wild. I wish I really had the answer. Of course, I think money has a lot to do with it, but
Okay.
yeah, I think what's going to stop it are the lawsuits. There are a few
Okay.
lawsuits out there that are hopefully going to make a dent in this. I wish
Okay.
I understood why specifically, excuse me.
That
Uh,
a doctor would,
but yeah,
yeah.
it is happening to minors, especially girls, the double
Mhm.
mastectomy, or what they call top surgery. Jazz Jennings had his genitals removed on TV. And so
Mm.
that was not even quiet. That was very public and celebrated. And
Hmm.
Jazz Jennings had a lot of complications from that too. So we all witnessed, anybody who watched that show, and actually didn't really watch it, I've only seen pieces of it, but anybody who
Yeah.
watched that show basically witnessed genital mutilation on TV. And no one's in trouble for that. Yeah, it's very strange if you really think
Well,
about it.
and because part of what I want to like, for me, I want to keep, I want to focus on like what God says, but I also want to be able to, I don't know if I'd say like compassion, because I feel for people who are in this place of struggle. Um, not that I'm like, they believe that they are being brave. And so when that surgery was put on TV, they think that it's like, oh, I finally am being myself. I'm finally free. Like, can you, like, I know just because you have been there, can you kind of explain that to somebody who's like, that's not freedom, so that we can kind of understand like both sides?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't see it as freedom. I see it
Mhm.
almost as a form of self-harm. It is a
Mhm.
form of self-harm.
That's
There's
good.
this masochism that happens with it because they become so dedicated to this belief that they're willing to go through physical pain and sacrifice to declare their belief system and declare that they're so dedicated to this. So it has a lot to do with that. And there's a lot of
Wow.
reinforcement there. So
Wow.
that um but people believe it's brave. I think because the messaging out there is it's on repeat that's
Wow.
brave. And
Wow.
there's
So,
so much propaganda to lead people to believe that they're being brave. And it used to be honestly very much something that was more of an outlying thing, and now it's become trendy. So it's less brave when it's trendy. Probably in the past, maybe you could say it was brave. I still think it was, you were destroying your body, but you were doing it, you were still an outsider doing it. in the past.
Yeah, I mean, because really, like you said, you get a glitter family. So you have this family who loves you, you get the support, and a lot of people who are trans are actually becoming very famous and they're getting a lot of support. So they're actually can get some financial gain from this, like as a person. And then you also were talking about the financial gain from the medical industry by, I mean, there's thousands of money that is being distributed with the medications and the surgeries, and it's not really being questioned. So it's a big industry that is raking in a lot of money on kind of all ends of this. So to have that stop, like you said, there has to be some lawsuits, there has to be things that force it to stop.
Yeah, and to as you were talking, I was thinking about how you asked me, how is this not freedom, or how does this go against freedom? You think about it, if you're chained to big pharma, if you're trained to taking
Mhm.
testosterone injections, or have to get the next surgery to pass as
Mhm.
whatever you want to pass as, you are a slave to this. It becomes
Wow.
an obsession. And you can compare this to addiction. So people who get addicted to whatever substance, they're a slave to
Yeah.
that substance. They're a slave to their addiction. It's very similar because there's this obsession with needing the next thing. There's
Hmm.
never an end. It's like you're chasing the dragon's tail. There's never an end point. They're always trying to get more. And a lot of times people end up landing in that place of depression or even suicidality once they've gotten to the last stage. Excuse
Hmm.
me, once they've gotten that bottom surgery and they're still not feeling whole, they're still not feeling like the man or woman or whatever non-binary identity they want to be, and they're still feeling the emptiness that they always felt, and they're left with nothing more to do to attain that feeling they've been chasing this whole time. So it's always
Hmm.
a feeling they're chasing. So that's certainly a type of slavery right there, and it is not freedom.
Wow. Wow. Like that is, I mean, that's exactly why people even talk about needing Jesus, is because they need to be saved. They're in this bondage their whole life. Like our mind is in this bondage. And now what they're doing is literally putting their body in this bondage.
Mm-hmm.
And, even you using the word masochism is a pretty strong word to use, but I want to come back to like what you talked about in your book. You use the word modern day lobotomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I find this fascinating because I even like was Googling lobotomy because I'm like, what was happening then? How long did this happen? Like one of the Kennedys, apparently the
Mm-hmm.
sisters or something got a lobotomy and she was like in a mental institution for the rest of her life. So lobotomies are basically the surgery that was done to people who were struggling mentally, who had like schizophrenia or other mental issues. And so they'd like put holes in their brain and do something in their prefrontal cortex. And they thought that this was like helping them. And so I think they did it for like 10 years or something,
Or
or more
yeah,
than that. And then and somebody even won a award, the Nobel Peace Prize or something like that
yeah.
for part of it. But there were people around this that were fighting against it. There were some people saying, no, this isn't okay. No, this isn't okay. But they kept doing it. So they kept doing the lobotomies until what finally stopped them to do these lobotomies?
I'm honestly not sure what was the catalyst to
Okay.
stop, but I think the last one was done in the 70s. I think it went on for a while.
Okay.
Yeah,
Like because the research wasn't, they weren't being helped, they were actually becoming worse from
they were
them.
becoming worse.
and that
Yes.
and that this is kind of like a modern day lobotomy, and that they believe, like you said, big pharma, the government believe that this is what's getting people free, it's helping people. And so as they're being free and helped, we don't have any data. And so now as we get data, like you said in your book, it takes like 8 to 10 years for somebody who transitions to really be able to see, like, is this how I want to live? And you're finding a lot of people who have transitioned are like, I don't want this. I was struggling. So could you give a couple stories of some detransitioners and like what they shared with you of like, what the problem was and why they wish they wouldn't have done that?
I mean, the common theme among them, they would say, is they were sold a lie. I think similar to the lobotomies, because the lobotomies were sold as this cure-all that will fix things, that will fix your ailments, it will fix. I'm assuming it started out more with people with schizophrenia and more
Mhm.
serious mental illness. This is
Mhm.
before we had medications, which are still clearly imperfect, but they
Yeah.
at least help some people. They
Right.
didn't even have that, so it was sold as this cure-all. It got more widespread where they were selling it for not even more challenging ailments, but basic things.
Yep.
And they were, trying to make it more widespread, and it became this group think. And I think it's very similar with the trans. So when people
Mm.
are struggling with something, feeling uncomfortable, the ones that really stuck with it, and the detransitioners that I've met that were trans, usually around 9 years is about the time it clicks for them. So I meet a lot of them in their late 20s because they started around 17, 18 years old, or they
Okay.
socially transition younger, but at that time they would start the medications right when they turn 18 or so.
Okay.
And then they turn 27, 28, and they realize they have a lot of health issues usually. That's part of it,
Mm.
what wakes them up. And then they also realize they kind of unraveled what they call they deprogram. They feel as they've been
Mm.
programmed, and they realize that they've been sold this big lie, that the problems that they were having was not fixed from being trans. In fact, it was covering it up even more and adding more problems. So they, yeah, the ones I'm friends with mostly are women that wanted to be a man.
Mm.
And there's one right now. I'm going to be in her film. I'm saying her, but she still goes by the name Matt because she's struggling with the social
Mm.
transition.
Mm.
She's come out publicly with her female name because that's the name of the film. It's going to be called Leaving Amy. And
Mm.
I've known Matt as Matt told me that Matt's name is Amy, and I've just like held it close to my heart, waiting
Mm.
for Matt to be ready to use that name. And Matt just tweeted how hard it is to go back to going by the female name and
Wow.
really being female. So it's still it's a psychological struggle.
Wow.
Matt's in the thick of it. So
Yeah.
it's not easy yet. I'm not sure. But yeah, they other ones that I've met, they went through a process, and then interestingly, while they thought they were a man for 8, 9 years, they're more in a way connecting to their womanhood than I'd say the average woman would,
Woman.
because they no
Right.
longer take it for granted. They realize how important it is.
Right.
And
And oh my gosh. And I want to talk about how parents can talk to their teens, but this is like making me think about this topic of women and that women like women power feminism is like that's being taken away because women want to be men. And so even in your book you talk about how there's like homophobia within the trans
mhm,
community because when you become a man, then it's like, great, now I'm part of society because I'm a man. And it's like, aren't we trying to like get away from that and just being happy with the way that you were made? But
mhm,
it's like a man's world. And so what the trans agenda is kind of making it more of a man's world, even with women or men playing women's sports and taking rights away from women. They can't be there, a man is coming in the bathroom or locker room and they don't have any rights, and if they speak up then they're the one who gets in trouble, that the transgender person who's a male as a female has all the rights. So it seems like there's a lot of issues around women turning to men. And I want to just give a suggestion to people who don't know about Abigail Schreier's book called Irreversible Damage. You do quote this in the book, and she talks about this, how there's this kind of craze. It's like this fad. But can you also maybe share a couple of the documentaries that you have been in?
yeah, I was in one called Gender Transformation: The Untold Realities. That was done by the Epic Times. The director, filmmaker is actually a Swedish man, so really politically neutral, and it doesn't have any politics in it at all. What he does is he tells the story of a family who had a teenage girl who was groomed by another family, and the girl ran away and went with the groomers and told the state of California that her mom was an abuser. Her mom was not an abuser, and it had a really tragic ending. So it's a docudrama. And it tells that story, and it threads in different experts and other detransitioners and their stories. And in there, I talk about before I woke up, had my big wake up, how I was even at a high school and was a part of screening for a secret LGBT group at a high school. I was in that, and I have a lot of shame. It was before tea was really a thing. This was in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
But still, any kind of group that's secret from parents, I now recognize is a big, bad no-no. But I thought I was helping the kids to explore their identities without the parents interfering. That's how stupid liberals think, and I was one of them. So I
Well,
talk about that.
and I personally, and this is just me, I don't like to just, because I know you very much are like strong on this. I don't like to say that they're stupid liberals because I know many
Naive.
liberals that are wonderful people, and I've really grown to appreciate their heart. And like, even you saying that, like, their heart is good and their heart means well because they truly believe that these kids have these horrible parents. Like, because even people who, because this kind of does get into the religious conversation of how sometimes conservatives can be like squash their kids and they control their kids, and they have this like, religious agenda that their kids can't do these certain things, and women don't have rights and men have all the rights. And so, we can kind of get into that conversation, but these are some of the things that kind of, as a therapist, they think that they're leading a kid away from, because that's so tragic to live in that you're helping them to be
Yeah.
awakened and saving them. And that's what a lot of, and so I wanted to speak on both sides, because I don't want to be a show where we're just like bashing one side, because then it doesn't allow for
I'm
critical
bashing
thinking.
myself because I was
I
that
know,
person.
I know, but I feel like we've gone away from critical thinking. Like,
Yeah.
we're not thinking critically on either side. And so I
Because
don't
I
think
know
it's
how
a,
they think. I was one of them. I think that's why I've
yes,
become a powerful voice on this, because I
yes,
understand how they think. I don't think I ever got to the extreme that many are at today, but I know where the seeds are planted, and I know the
right.
naive belief that you're helping and don't recognize that this is really dividing families. And and this was in Palo Alto, California, by the way, a very left-leaning area. There weren't any, I don't, most of the families weren't even conservative or religious anyway. Not that there's
Got it.
anything wrong with that, but it wasn't about
No,
that.
so it wasn't that. That's a very good point. Like, and I think that's Abigail Sharia talks about it, that in her book, that it really isn't like a political thing. It's like the trans agenda is very much about, like, it doesn't matter what you vote or what you believe. Your kid's probably trans. Like, that's
They're
kind of
after them
the,
all.
yeah. And okay, so I want to talk on what should parents do if their kid is struggling with mental health issues, maybe eating disorder, or even if they're like going through divorce or something like that. Like, what do they do? Because I think some people are like afraid to send them to a therapist. Or let's say, what do they do if their kid's now starting to talk the language and maybe socially transitioning, or how do parents handle this?
Yeah, I wish I had like a one size fits all answer, but the one thing I'll say, a thread, a common theme among the kids who get caught into trans is usually they are left alone more for one reason or another.
Mm.
It's not because parents are neglectful or bad parents, but usually because the family's going through something, or the parents started a new job, there's a divorce in the family, maybe somebody's sick. There was a case where the mom talked about how she was just diagnosed with breast cancer and her daughter had to be on her own for a little more, and that's when the daughter decided she was trans, and the school trans her child behind their back. So if you are noticing that your child is falling into this, or is becoming more withdrawn, or spending more time online, I think the best thing you could do is to step back and figure out how you can be more present for your child. And it's easier said than done when there's life, but that is probably the biggest culprit, because schools, the internet, friends, they're all
Yeah.
raising your children more than you are. And that's usually
Mhm.
how they get caught up in the trans agenda.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Like, I was so glad that you brought that up, because I was thinking the internet time, the time on their phone. And so what happens is a lot of these kids are struggling, or their parents are busy. And so they're just kind of getting lost on the internet. And here they kind of find this glitter family, these people who love them and are really supportive and kind of are saying all the things like, are you struggling at home? Or do you feel like nobody likes you? Or do your parents not get you? And they're saying these things that really are like, yes, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And they feel heard, they feel valued and
Exactly.
connected. So you saying that parents spending time with their kids is the most important thing is huge.
Yeah, it kind of go back to the basics. I'm obviously not against therapy, but I do think that the family is the first step. And a lot of this is about feeling connected or feeling disconnected from the family, because that's how the trans people recruit kids who are feeling lost.
Yeah.
And if you can connect more with your kid, probably you and your kid have a better chance to pull out of it.
Yeah, that's really good. I'm just going to give a couple other things from your book that you talk about. Was like having conversations with your child. You have, I mean, I really want to encourage any of you listening to get the book. It's very easy. It's a very easy read, very quick, but it's kind of direct and to the point. And I like that at the end you even talk about like definitions because
Yeah.
I think it's important. So let's say your kid is kind of starting to walk through this and they've already been exposed to some things. You want to know the language so that you're not like shocked. Like the biggest thing that I know as a therapist when clients are struggling with something and their parent is shocked is almost like a post-traumatic event for that kid because they're like, I can't be myself because my parent is going to freak out. And so the more a parent can be, and you talk about this to validate and just hear them, and validation does not mean you agree. So it's important to just say, I hear you, I'm here with you, and not kind of start ragging on them, but just sit with them, like you said. But know some of the information, know the data, know like look, you even said like go look up some of these famous trans people so that they can know what their kid might be listening to.
And they're parroting. So you know what's coming from them and you know what's coming from the internet. And you may not even want to confront them on that at the time, but at least you know. And to recognize too that this has a lot of cult-like qualities, and one of the goals is to have you be, as the parent, be the outsider and your child is the insider. So the less you know, the easier it is for your child to say, well, you don't understand me, and get more mad and shut you out further. But if you understand the language and you can talk to them using this wackadoodle language, quite frankly, then it'll be easier to connect with your child.
Hmm. Yeah, that's good. And yes, you said get your child off the internet, get your child outside to play. Remember, you're the parent, so still maintain authority. I think a lot of parents are like, I just want my kid to like me. And so then they just kind of stop parenting, and then their kid is running the show. Stay grounded in reality, be calm, don't be confrontational, um, focus on the relationship, make family time a priority. I mean, again, these are like a lot of basic things, but I think when we get busy, we stop this. And then you said support gender, non-conforming traits and behaviors without affirming a new gender. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so a lot of times kids want to explore being different because they're teenagers and that's their thing. And that is the cool thing to do now, is to be gender non-conforming, meaning there are these gender stereotypes that are being reinforced now. If you're, they say if you play with Barbies, you're on the scale of being more of a girl, and if you play with trucks, you're on the scale of being more of a boy. Well, regardless of what toys you play with, we know you're either a girl or a boy, but these are the regressive stereotypes that are being taught to them. So if you let them, a girl, cut her hair short and maybe wear boy clothes, but you're never going to say she is a boy. You're never going to tell her that she has a different name, and you keep her grounded in reality, but let her explore her styles, that's better. And if we're talking about kids who might grow up to be gay or lesbian, and you stifle them and you tell them they can't explore their style, then they're probably going to push back harder because they're teenagers.
Yeah. So you're saying kind of let them experiment is what you're saying?
Yeah,
But
experiment
like,
with their style, but not with reality.
got it. Like, and I feel like some parents are listening and they're like, no way. I can hear some parents like listening, be like, I'm not gonna
And
let them do that. Like, and you get
and
to do
honestly, that's
you,
within
like,
range of your culture too. I mean,
yeah,
I
I
know
think
you
that
don't,
that's
because
mhm.
and it also depends on how extreme or how set that kid is, because there are those, I think there are some of those kids on the spectrum of being really effeminate boys and really masculine girls, but I think there
Yeah,
are many that aren't. They just want to be because they want to be cool.
right.
So it's up to you to figure out. And again, the other big thing I say all the time is don't listen to experts, listen to yourself,
Mm,
because it really depends. It depends on your
right,
culture and your values. And you're not going to want probably your boy to wear a dress to church and things
mm,
like that. So
right,
there's a range of what's appropriate within your family and your culture, and you'll have to figure that what to do within your family.
right.
But I do think if a kid is really pushing back just on their style and wanting to be a little more masculine and a little more feminine than you're comfortable with, that's better than sending them on a path to being not talking to you anymore and going into this basically cult-like mentality and
Right.
getting medications from Planned Parenthood without your permission.
Yeah, because that is actually what's happening is that they're able
Yes,
to get these things without parent permission, and it's being supported that the parents are the bad guys. And this is the kind of the part that's really scary is that parents are losing rights and kids are walking this out and doing the social transition, then the physical transition, and then cutting themselves off from their family. And so there's a lot of trauma that's happening from this, and then what you're finding is a lot of these kids are then realizing, why did I do this? I don't have my
mm-hmm.
family, now my body, I don't have my body the way that it was made. And so there's a lot of tragedy that's happened. This is not being talked about. This part of it is not being talked about. Only the glitter family, only
Mm-hmm.
the I'm free, I'm finally out kind of a thing.
Yeah, there's a
Correct?
lot of grief and loss and estrangement within families. There's a lot of grief on the parents' end who have been through this, and then
Mm,
the people who, the ones who I talk to who are going to be open about it are the detransitioners. But I think even trans people are going through this, they're just not openly talking about it, is
mhm.
the grief and loss of their family that they thought were bad, and they're still trying to figure it out.
Right. And look, and the family might not be perfect. I mean, I think we can identify that every one of
Usually
our
not.
families, there's
Yeah.
certain things that you're kind of like, your dad might be judgmental about something and you're like, geez, like, why can't I just say what I think? And there's dynamics like that, that it doesn't mean that you have to stop being what the way that your body was born. Like there are other avenues to be able to kind of be curious and discover more of yourself. And I would recommend for some people, take a break, or you can have healthy boundaries with your family that maybe feels unhealthy. Because I work with people who have a lot of trauma and there's trauma in the family. And so I don't want to negate those that have the trauma and that really do need to have healthy boundary, but it doesn't mean you need to change your body in the process.
Exactly.
Like work with a therapist, have the healthy boundary with somebody in your family that maybe is unhealthy or even abusive. I mean, that's where I would say like it's causing the problem with families who do actually have abuse, versus those who have values that the kid is not agreeing with because the therapist is now taking them, or the school is taking them in a different direction. That's not abuse. And so
Hmm.
I feel like we're losing the real problems. We're missing out on the kids that really are struggling with abusive homes. And I think earlier you talked about losing the plot.
Yeah.
You and I were talking about, can you maybe, we have to wrap up here, but can you
Hmm.
talk a little bit
Well,
about
there's a lot of
that?
different exam. I was talking about people on our side getting so harped up on language and pronouns, so that, say I accidentally call a biological woman a he just by accident because they still go by a male name, and I say he, then I get piled on and then I feel like they're losing the plot on that end. But then of course the trans people are losing the plot. The therapists are losing the plot because they think they're helping all these kids from their parents, but and they're helping them from abuse, but they're making it worse. Even the families that are really struggling or have abuse, this isn't helping them by dividing them. You have to make a
No.
full assessment.
Right.
I actually had an article a long time ago that said, well, it was about what about the abusive parents, right? Because those are the ones we really need to keep the kids away from, right? Maybe. And yeah, of course, when we really have abuse, we still are mandated reporters, and maybe they need to go into a foster home. Not a perfect system, but sometimes that needs to happen. Um, but even the quote unquote abusive parents need to be involved, or you need to at least work with them to be able to help the child. You need to at least get to know them to know what the issues are.
Right.
And you need to work with the family. This is the only parents that they have. If they're physically that abusive, then we probably don't want to put them together. And there are cases of that in the past. Social workers used to be, to a fault, put physically abusive babies with with their parents, and then there'd be tragic outcomes. And now it's the opposite, where they're instantly pulling families apart when it's just a family that maybe has a communication issue, or
Mm,
even the teenagers is acting out and says, I hate my mom, and then they immediately side with the child, and that's losing the plot too. So I
yeah,
think we're globalizing so much, and we
yeah,
have to look at people as individuals. We have to look at families as individuals, and we need to do thorough assessments and slow down and not globalize everything to everybody's this and everybody's that, and
that's
everybody
good.
should do this and everybody should do that. And in real life, people are different.
That's so good. This has been really wonderful having you on. I'm so grateful for you stepping out and following through and not caring what people think and just really being bold. And I just see a lot more happening for you. I want to encourage people to get her book. Again, it's called The Practical Response to Gender Distress. And you can get it on Amazon. How else can people get a hold of you and find you?
So I have a website. It's thetruthfultherapist.org. I do consultations for families if they're in the trans thing, or other issues too, just to help them, point them in the right direction. Usually
Yep.
the theme is about empowering you and help you recognize if you're working with a therapist perhaps, and seeing if they're kosher and whether you should carry on with them, or how you should advocate for yourself. I really encourage parents to advocate for themselves and for their families and to stay involved. So that's the
That's good.
themes. And then,
That's good.
excuse me, I have an Instagram that you mentioned that has funny and serious videos. You can see my goldfish video there and plenty of others. That's at the dot truthful therapist. I have a YouTube, which is at the truthful therapist, which has a lot of my Instagram videos and then clips of interviews and things like that on there. And I have a Substack, which is Pam the Truthful Therapist.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Pan. I'm going to just end with praying, and then really just want to encourage people to kind of let go of any fear. I'm really praying. So yeah, I'm just going to pray. So Holy Spirit, we just thank you for this time. I thank you for Pamela and what she's doing. Just want to remind us of the verse 2 Timothy 1:7, that God didn't give us the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and sound mind. And also just a reminder that he made us in the image of God. So even though we might have struggles in our body, and that it's okay, that we can go to him, that he made us male and female, and that he wants us to go to him with our struggles instead of hurting ourselves or, blaming other people, but just to really get curious with God. So I just pray for increase confidence identity with God, and that people can go to God instead of always just going to other people, and that they can get the right people. So that I pray for the right counselors, the right people, the right situations. And I also just pray over Pamela's book that, we honor her. I thank you, God, for her heritage and her being Jewish. And I just honor that. And I pray that her book will blow up, that she can be on a ton more documentaries, and that she can keep being the way that she is. And I'm just thankful that she came on this show, and we just praise you and worship you. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.